Welcome to Draft Utopia. Today, Joey and I are going to rank every draft class in the last 10 years, starting with 2015 and working our way up to 2024. And then we'll give you guys a preview. We'll give you two bonuses at the end. One, I'll go over the top 100 player ratings in the new EA Sports college football video game. And number two, I will also give you a brief preview of the 2025 draft classes. And then we'll be off until the first week of August, where we'll recap the Hall of Fame game, preview the ACC, preview the NFC North, and preview the AFC North as season 14 of Draft Utopia kicks off in 2 weeks from today. But first, we're gonna they got 5 second-round players in the first 10 rounds, and they got 8 players in the top 250 in the first 11 with their 11 picks in the first 10 rounds, to put things into perspective. So that, yeah. And I'm going to recap this in further detail at the end of the show. So this is not the only time you're going to hear Joey and I praising the Guardians draft, because I will recap this at the very end of the show, because we are growing through every draft class from 2015 to 2024. And while I'm trying to get the ball rolling on the 2015 drafts, Joey's just pushing the fast forward button. He's like, no, we're going to go to the Guardians 2024. It's current, it's recent, it's trending. We have to talk about it. He's pushing the fast forward button. and the remote's stuck on fast forward. So it's like, yeah, that's basically... I'm kidding, by the way, but yeah, the Guardians killed it. Yeah. All right, and now I'm pushing rewind. I'm going to take us back to the 2015 NFL Draft. I'm going to keep this as brief as possible. Only 2 players in my top 12 got an A-plus grade. Those 2 players were Amari Cooper and Traw Waynes. I hit on Amari Cooper. I whiffed big time on Traw Waynes, to the point where if I post the screenshot, I will get roasted by Joey. I will. Like, if I post the screenshot on Restream of all of my grades and write-ups from that draft, only 2 players are still on the teams that drafted them, which is the crazy part. And those 2 players are Tyler Lockett, and we're going to talk about each draft class, but I'm ranking the 2015 NFL Draft as the 5th best draft of the 5 major professional sports. And if we include the 2015 WNBA Draft, I would rank it at 6, because every other draft in 2015 had a player who made a bigger impact at number 1 than Jameis Winston. And that is why the NFL Draft came in so low. And we had a writer named Don Portman. He would do rookie recaps for us. He had, and Amari Cooper, he had a good rookie year, even though the Raiders kind of stunk in 2014 during Carr's rookie year. But Amari Cooper got the Raiders to the playoffs as a rookie. Scherf and Williams have been nice journeymen. Brandon Scherf, Leonard Williams. Jeremiah had Williams and Cooper at 1 and 2, and then I think he had Winston at 3 and 4. Winston and Mariota at 3 and 4 in that draft. I gave the Rams an F grade for Todd Gurley, and Todd Gurley made me look like a dumbass out of the gate, but then injuries plagued his career. I gave the Vikings an A+ for Traw Waynes. Do not... I know I deserve some flack for that. To be fair, I loved Waynes in that draft. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you why the other drafts are better than the NFL in a bit here, but going through the back end of round 1, Armstead, you had a lot of reaches. DJ Humphries was probably the best value pick in the back end of the first round. Because he was a left tackle for the Cardinals for many years up until this season. Shaq Thompson. I said there were 0 players still on the teams that drafted them. That is not true, actually. Apparently Shaq Thompson is still on the Carolina Panthers. I gave Thompson and Gurley the only F grades of round 1, but Shaq Thompson outlasted everyone. So I sincerely apologize to Shaq Thompson. I hope you're recovered from your injury and you're ready to kick ass next year. So I'm already issuing an apology. He was great wherever he went. Raiders, Cowboys, Browns. I'm not saying he wasn't great. I mean, that's Amari Cooper was one of 2 A+ grades along with Traw Waynes. I know he's a journeyman, but he's been just as good as advertised. I don't think there's a Hall of Fame player in this draft. There are stars. You're not wrong when you say there are stars in this draft, but this is not a draft with a Hall of Fame player. That's all I'm getting at. That's why I have this draft at number 5. Here's the thing with Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper has never had actually, I'm just double checking something. Has Amari Cooper ever had 3 consecutive seasons of 1,000 yards? He had 280 with the Raiders and 725 with the Cowboys. I'm pretty sure that adds up to 1,005. 725 plus 280. My math might be wrong there. 725 and 280. You add the 8, you add a 0. 7 and 2, you add another 0. Yeah, that's 1,005. So, yes. So, he did. Yes. So, my math was correct. So, Mari Cooper's had 1,000 yards in he's only failed to exceed 1,000 yards twice in 2017 with the Raiders and in 2021 with the Cowboys before being traded to Cleveland. Those are the only seasons where he failed to exceed 1,000 yards in his 10-year career. So, and the 2 players, so there's 3 players that are still on the teams that drafted them. Shaq Thompson, Tyler Lockett, and Grady Jarrett. Those are the only 3 players still on the teams that drafted them in this entire draft class. And I gave the Seahawks an A- for Tyler Lockett. I think that's about right. And I basically said, remember that rap song, Pop, Lock, and Drop It? Well, if Lockett scores, I plan on singing Pop, Lock It, Drop It. Horrible pun at the time, but it was one I came up with. It was original. It was a horrible pun at the time, but it was an original pun as well. And the Falcons got Grady Jarrett with the very first pick in round 5, which Lockett, Lockett had 3 consecutive years of 1,000 yards before last year, but Lockett really struggled his first 3 years, and then his contract year, he gets 10 touchdowns. And to be fair, his rookie year, he did decent. And then his second and third year, I think, were cut by injuries. And then he got 10 touchdowns in his contract year. Then he had 82. Then he broke 1,000 yards after extending. Then he had 100 receptions and 10 touchdowns in 2020. And then he had 4 years of 1,000 yards before last season occurred after the Seahawks added Jackson Smith-Njigba. So, his numbers are still at a high level. So, he's been very good. Grady Jarrett went to Atlanta. Some honorable mentions from the 2015 draft. My honorable mention on offense is Stephon Diggs. I gave the Vikings an A-plus grade for taking him in the third round. I gave the Vikings an A-plus for taking... I thought the Vikings killed it in the 2015 draft. Eric Kendricks, Daniel Hunter, and Stephon Diggs. They just couldn't keep all that talent. They were the team that probably had the best overall draft on paper, but, they really... And the Bengals got CJ Uzoma, who was decent for a few years before his contract year. Steelers got Jesse James as a backup tight end. So there were some okay players. I'm not going to go through the entire list here, but yeah, there were some okay players. Anything else we want to add before we get to the 2015 MLS draft, which came in at 4 on my list? Yeah. And the two most successful 7th-round picks in this draft were Trent Brown, drafted by the 49ers. He became the Patriots' right tackle. then their left tackle, and now he's the Bengals' right tackle, and Trey McBride, good special teams player, but nothing else. I gave Trent Brown an A grade. I was kind of subjective at the time, though. I did say he had versatility, play anywhere on the offensive line. He'd be an ideal replacement to Iupati, but he will be a huge downgrade initially. That's basically what I said at the time in 2015. He ends up going to the Patriots and becoming their right tackle. So I actually gave so I was right about the A grade, but I was subjective about the pick initially when it was made. So yeah. Yeah. I don't think he became a starter until the 2018-2019 season. I'm double checking. Yeah, he was with the 49ers for 3 years. They cut him. The Patriots picked him up the year they won the Super Bowl and made him their right tackle. And then the Raiders picked him up. He struggled there, and the Patriots gave him another chance. So he is a journeyman. He's on his 5th different NFL team, but at the same token, he was a starter next to Colton Miller at right tackle early in Colton's career, and then he went back to New England as the left tackle. Started out as the right tackle, but went back. He started 93 games from 2018. He's played in 100 games, but he started 93 career games. And he started and he did start all 16 games in 2016. In 2016, he did start all 16 games, and he started 10 games at right tackle before being placed on IR with a shoulder injury. And then the Patriots got him for a 5th-round pick in the trade that sent the 95th pick and Tavarius Moore to the 49ers. So well, Joey sort of has a bias towards some of these football players. Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. I'm going to get to the 2015 MLS draft. That's number 4 on my thing. If we rant about this stuff all day, we're never going to get anything done. But yeah, Kyle Larin was my number 1 player. He was the MLS Rookie of the Year. He was the number 1 player in this draft, and I had my number 1 and number 2 players were Kyle Larin of Connecticut and Christian Roldan of Washington. I'm pulling up my mock draft as a receipt. I had Kyle Larin and Christian Roldan at 1 and 2 in my MLS mock draft back in 2015. And those were the two best players in the class. Those were the two best players in the class. Roldan fell from 2 to 15 to the Seattle Sounders, and Kyle Larin had 3 dominant seasons. I mean, he had a tremendous soccer IQ. His soccer IQ was on par with Winston's IQ, and he was drawing offers from Europe, the English Premier League, but he only played 3 years in Orlando. He had 43 goals in 3 years, 17 in his rookie year, 14 his second year, and 12 his third year. And, he dominated. And I had Roldan at number 2 in that draft. Roldan is the only player from this draft that's still on the team that drafted him in the first round. So I got it right. You have to admit, you have to give me some credit here. I got it right with Roldan, and with Larin and Roldan. Yeah, some of the players that are still in the league, I like the Alex Bono pick. He did win an MLS Cup with Toronto. Ken LeBlanc's favorite player in this draft was Syracuse goalie Alex Bono, but he did win an MLS Cup as the starter. I don't remember if he won the MLS Cup or if Stefan Frey was the starting goalie at the time, but I know Toronto had Stefan Frey and they had Alex Bono. So they had 2 good goalies. Matt Polster of SIU Edwardsville. I did not know who Matt Polster was, but the Chicago Fire took him 7th. He made, and Don, one of our former writers, he said he made Chris look like a fool for giving him a D grade. And yeah, Polster had a really good rookie year, and he's been good. He's been a really steady defensive midfielder. Matt Polster, the Chicago Fire's 7th overall pick. And he had a really steady rookie year. I won't lie. A lot of these guys, Tim Parker, Axel Sjoberg was the only player in this draft to get to an All-Star game. He's a 6'7" Swedish midfielder. They gave up a 2016 draft pick to move up from 19 to 14. I had Roldan. Roldan was actually my only A-plus grade of the first round. Leo Stolz was another guy I liked, but I don't think he quite panned out the way I thought he would. And I'll quickly go through round 2 to see if there were any gems. I don't think there were. But the MLS draft for me, 2015 MLS draft, it comes in at number 4. Now, this was tough. When it comes to the 2015 draft classes, I went with the NBA here at number 3. I did, because, Karl Anthony Towns had a good rookie year. He's still on the team that drafted him. Towns was a player that I really liked. I had Towns going number 1. I had D'Angelo Russell going number 2. He's still on the Lakers. He's been solid. I don't think he ever won an NBA title, but he's been a solid point guard wherever he's been, whether it's Minnesota or the Lakers. I gave the Knicks an F grade for Porzingis at the time, but Porzingis is now an NBA champion, so these grades really don't mean shit. I gave the 76ers an A grade for Okafor. I loved Okafor. He was initially my number 1 player, ended up being a massive letdown. I had Miles Turner. I gave the Pacers an A grade for Miles Turner. Miles Turner's still the Indiana Pacers starting center 10 years later. And Devin Booker. I had Devin Booker going in the top 10. I gave the Suns a B grade for Devin Booker, but Devin Booker's been better than advertised. You look at the top 15 of this NBA draft, the 3 stars are Karl Anthony Towns, Miles Turner at 11, and Devin Booker at 13. Those are the 3 players still on the teams that drafted him. You want to say anything about those 3? And the Golden State Warriors took Kevon Looney at 30. I believe he's still on the Warriors. I'm double checking. Kevon Looney. I believe he's still on Golden State. He is. And he moved from power forward at UCLA to center. So that's the four. So Golden State actually picked at 30 and hit on their draft pick that year. I know, crazy, right? He's a starter, but he's still on Golden State. So there were 4 players picked in the first round, still on the teams that drafted them. Minnesota at 1 with Karl Anthony Towns, Miles Turner at 11 with the Indiana Pacers, the Texas center. 13, Devin Booker, Kentucky shooting guard, and Kevin Looney, UCLA power forward who moved to center. Yep. On that note, we're going to get to the 1 second round pick that did pan out is Norman Powell. There's no second round pick still on the team that drafted them, but Norman Powell won an NBA title with Toronto, the team that drafted him in round 2. And they didn't need a shooting guard at the time because they had DeRozan at shooting guard. But if DeRozan makes a permanent switch to small forward, I could live with starting Powell. But, they had to, Toronto's just one of these teams that Powell did win a championship on the Kawhi Leonard Raptors team. And then he went to the Clippers with Kawhi. So NBA draft for me comes in at number 3. You can make an argument for this at number 2, but I'm going to go with the 2015 MLB draft at number 2 because there are so many World Series champions in this draft. It's not even funny. The Diamondbacks took Dansby Swanson at number 1 and traded him to the Braves. Dansby won a World Series. And the big thing with this draft, Joey, was the shortstops. Which one would go number 1? Dansby Swanson, Alex Bregman, Brennan Rodgers. That was the $1 million question. I mocked Rodgers at number 1, but the thing is, all 3 shortstops have had success. I mean, Bregman moved from shortstop to third base, won a World Series, and Brennan Rodgers moved from shortstop to second base. He's been successful with the Rockies. He's still on the team that drafted him. So each of those top 3 picks panned out. Dylan Tate went 4th. Kyle Tucker went 5th. Astros got Kyle Tucker. He won a World Series. So 3 of the top 5 picks won World Series. 4 of the top 5 picks are decent starters. Andrew Benintendi went 7th. That's 4 World Series champions in the top 7 and 5 impact players. Ian Happ went to the Cubs at 9. So that's 5 World Series champions in the top 9 of the draft. I think Happ did get called up that year. Tyler Stevenson, still the starting catcher on the Reds. He was a high school catcher, but he's the starting. I gave I had a 4th round grade on Josh Naylor when the Marlins drafted him, but he's turned things around in Cleveland, despite me giving Naylor an F grade in 2015, because I had a 4th round grade. And then Don replied, 4th round prospect, my ass. He's posting a 327 on the Marlins single A team. This is why you look at, Don was great. Don Porton was one of our former writers. He would do the research for us, and he was great at it when we had the old code back in the day. He'd do the research for us, and if the Guardians win a World Series, Naylor would become the 5th sixth player in the top 12 with a World Series, which is nuts. But 2015 was a really good MLB draft year. Yeah. What about the guys at the top of the draft? Dansby Swanson, um, Brendan Rodgers, Alex Bregman, Kyle Tucker on the Astros World Series teams, Ian Happ with the Cubs, Benintendi with the Red Sox. This draft was stacked, Joey. I don't think any other draft has measured up to this draft as far as the MLB goes. I know that's going to offend some people, but a lot of guys exceeded expectations in this draft. They did. And oh yeah, the Dodgers took Walker Buehler at 24. That's also been a good pick. That's the sixth World Series champion in the top 24. And and that's 9 impact players in the top 24. So, yeah. The Pittsburgh Pirates took Brian Hayes at 32, and I had Kevin Newman graded higher than Brian Hayes, but Brian Hayes is now a star player with the Pirates. He got extended until 2030 for a reason. So that's a compensation pick in round 1. So that's the 10th impact player in the top 32. So this was a But Brian Hayes is the Pirates' best player. He has like an 85 on MLB The Show for rating. And he's been the Pirates' third baseman for years now. So he's been a good player. Can I pull up Brian Hayes' stats, Joey? Let me pull up the analytics before you roast me for mentioning a video game. Let me pull up the career stats for Brian Hayes to show you what I mean. All right, I'm pulling up the career stats. He made the MLB in 2020, developed for a few years, but, he's been steady. He's had 32 hits in each of his 5 MLB seasons. He started with a 376 batting average in 24 games, and he's never gotten back to that 376 batting average, but at the same token, his RBIs have gone up each year. He went from 11 RBIs to 38 to 41 to 61. His hits have gone up from 32 to 93 to 123 to 134. He gets on base a lot. His runs have gone up 17, 49, 55, 65. And he's just a very consistent player for the Pirates. One of their core players, too. I'll look that up right now. He had 30. He had 15 home runs in 2023, which was a career high. He started off with 5 home runs in 2020, then 6, then 7. He's at 15 he had 15 last year. He only has 3 this year, but his career on base percentage is .316. But while his batting average and his on base percentage has dropped each year. That's the thing. Even though his home runs, RBIs, and hits and runs have increased each year, his on base percentage has dropped each year. This is he was placed on the 10-day IL earlier this year, and he's I think that's part of the reason he's not 100%. but that was back in May. And, the Pirates, they came back against the Phillies last night. So the Pirates are a game above 500. They're a half a game back of the wild card. Brian Hayes is one of the big catalysts of this rebuild. Yep. And there's other players in this draft that were in the back half of round one. Ryan Mountcastle, the Orioles took him at 36. I had a third round grade on him, and they had Manny Machado at the time. He was a third baseman at Haggerty High School in Florida, but he's moved to first base. He's now the Orioles' first baseman, Ryan Mountcastle, and he's a decent first baseman for the Orioles. Daz Cameron was a player that was projected to go in the top 5, but contract issues caused him to fall to the Astros at 37. I'm not sure where he is now. I'll look at Daz Cameron. He's on the Athletics as a backup center fielder. Okay. All right. You're not wrong. He never even played for the Astros. He played for the Tigers. He got traded to Detroit in the Verlander trade. He got sent to Detroit in the Justin Verlander trade, I believe. Because the Astros won the 2017 World Series, and I think Verlander was a big reason for that. So I gave the Braves an F grade for Austin Riley. Are you kidding me? I think you can make an argument that Austin Riley's better than Brian Hayes. That's another World Series champion. So that's 7 World Series champions in the first round and 12 impact players in the first 41 picks. And Tristan McKenzie was the last pick in that draft. He's still on the Guardians. So that is aged horribly. That is aged horribly. I deserve to be roasted for that. I deserve to be roasted for that. It's like, it's not even debatable. I deserve to be fucking castrated for that. I did not, to be fair, this was my first year grading drafts. And I was a work in progress. Let's be real. I was not as objective as I am now back in 2015. So to be fair, that's not an excuse for my behavior, but it's like that is a legitimate. But yeah, the 2015 MLB draft comes in at number 2. And the number 1 draft class in 2015, the 2015 NHL Draft. This is the best draft of the 5. It's not even close. The Edmonton Oilers took Connor McDavid at number 1. The Buffalo Sabres took Jack Eichel at number 2. Eichel would get traded to the Vegas Golden Knights. He'd win a Stanley Cup with Vegas. So McDavid and Eichel were both as good as advertised. They were both the preseason number 1 and number 2 picks. And both players have lived up to the hype. I mean, McDavid was amazing in the OHL. 99 points in 56 games in his pre-draft year. And then he had 120 points in his draft year. So McDavid's been as good as advertised. And the same could be said with Eichel. I mean, both of those guys. Yep. And then Dylan Strome. I gave the Coyotes an A+ for Dylan Strome, and that's debatable. Dylan Strome struggled at first, but he really did get his shit together with the Capitals this year. He was the Capitals' first line center with Ovechkin. He beat out Backstrom and Kuznetsov, two guys on the Capitals' 2018 Stanley Cup team, to be the line one center on the Capitals. And I'll give Strome credit for that, because I could sit here and be a dickhead and say Strome's a bust because he didn't work out with the Coyotes. He was Connor McDavid's teammate on the Erie Otters, second line center. But, he improved his defensive awareness, acceleration when skating was a weakness, but he improved all his weaknesses, and he really put it together with the Capitals this past season. He actually led the Capitals in points during the regular season. Dylan Strome, third pick. So I can't call him a bust. Was he a reach? Yeah, I think you can make that argument, but I can't say he's a bust either. He had a really good year with the Capitals, Joey. I mean, objectively speaking, he had a great regular season with the Capitals this year. I mean, he had a career high 67 points, 27 goals, 40 assists, 67 points, and he had 42 assists with the Capitals the year before. I mean, he started his career with the Coyotes, struggled. He went to the Blackhawks. He got better there, learning under Jonathan Toews for like 3 or 4 years. And then he went to the Capitals the last 2 years, and he's really hit his stride in Washington the last 2 years. So I can't call him a bust. Is he a journeyman? Yes. Is he a reach? That's debatable. Is he a bust? Hell no. So objectively, I can't call Dylan Strome a bust. Fair enough. Mitch Marner went fourth in this draft. I had Marner at 4. He's versatile enough to play anywhere at forward. He had 126 points next to Max Domi, the Coyotes' 2013 first-round pick. Marner is NHL ready. The only issue I had with him was shooting accuracy, and he struggled. I saw Marner struggle to pass the puck and display inconsistent shooting accuracy on his wrist shots. He's cleaned that up in Toronto. Been a really good second line right winger for many years. And the 5th pick in this draft was Noah Hannafin. Noah Hannafin, Boston College defenseman. I didn't like him as much as the other defensemen, but to be fair to Hannafin, the Vegas Golden Knights gave him an 8-year contract after getting him at the trade deadline this year. So I can't call him a bust either. Very good top 5. Marner? Okay. Yeah, and to be fair, he is an alternate captain on Toronto in a contract year. Hasn't been extended yet. Hasn't been traded yet. But looking at him, he didn't come up until 2016, 2017. He had 61 points his rookie year, 69 points his second year. He had 94 points in his final year of his rookie deal. That's really what warranted a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year extension. And 67 points, 67 points. Then he's had 97 and 99 the last 2 years. And, if he can get over 100 points, I think he gets paid. I mean, really, he's only had one season where he's had 4 seasons where his face-off percentage was above 50%. His rookie year, he only won 37.8%, and his 4th year, he won 26.9%. But the last 2 years, he's had 0 and 25. So through his 8-year NHL career, he's only had 4 seasons where he's won 50% of his faceoffs. He's better at the wing than at center. But his time on the ice has increased each year. 1648, 1623, then it goes up to 1949 in year 3, and then 21 minutes, 22 minutes, 20 minutes, 21 minutes, 16 seconds, 21 minutes, 16 seconds. So looking at the metrics here, he's been a steady player for Toronto at 4. Okay, so he had 99 points in 22-23. He only had 85 points in 23-24, and he enters a contract year. That's probably why he hasn't been extended yet, because you go from 97 to 99, and then you get 85 points in your pre-contract year in 69 games. There's some questions about whether you are the guy. And his career high for goals is 35, but he's been a steady playmaker. I mean, he's had 42 assists in each NHL season. He's been very good in terms of playmaking. He fixed his playmaking with the London Knights after his draft year and has been a very consistent playmaker in terms of assists at the NHL level. Yeah, and this is the thing. Marner's not going to reach 100 unless he has like 30 goals and 70 assists. That's kind of the impression I'm getting with him. Like, he had 68 assists his third year, and he had 69 assists in 22-23. But I think he would have to get 31 and 69 or 30 and 70 in order to reach 100. I really think that's the only way Marner can reach 100, because his career high for goals is 35, and that was back in 21-22. And we're entering the 24-25 season. So because I don't think Marner would get traded unless a team gave Toronto 2 or 3 first-round picks, and none of these teams that are rebuilding want to trade draft picks to Toronto. So I think that says something. They're kind of stuck with the contract. If Toronto keeps this guy and they don't get to the Stanley Cup next year, and right now my preseason prediction is Edmonton over Toronto. So if Toronto keeps Marner, they don't trade him, and they don't get to the Stanley Cup, or they don't even get to the Eastern Conference Finals, and Marner walks in free agency, then you basically wasted his prime. That's the big takeaway here. Yeah. Yeah, because somebody's probably going to overpay for him because he's one of the better second line wingers. Some people think he's good enough to play on a top line with his numbers, with his production. So he's probably going to get overpaid next offseason. Like a team like Chicago or a team like San Jose or a team that's just in a total rebuild, yeah, he can be a top line player there. But if he wants to be a player on a winning team, he's going to have to play either a second line role or maybe a third line role. Like he's currently the second line right winger on Toronto. I think he'd have to play that type of role in order to get the most out of him because he's good. But yeah, yeah, yeah. I mentioned Noah Hannafin. Pavel Zacha went sixth. I mean, Zacha had initial success with New Jersey. Um, but he went to the Boston Bruins. He's now on the Bruins. He's been a top six forward on both the New Jersey Devils and the Bruins. Ivan Provorov and Zach Werenski went 7 and 8. Provorov was my favorite defenseman in this draft. He gets traded to Columbus, and now you have Provorov in a contract year, and you have Zach Werenski, who's been with the Blue Jackets his entire career. San Jose traded Timo Meier to the New Jersey Devils for draft picks because Timo Meier was set to be a UFA and they knew they weren't going to get him back. But Timo Meier's been a good top 10 pick. And Colorado, Mikko Rantanen, first line right winger with Landeskog and Nate McKinnon. So Colorado got that pick right. So basically, nobody drafted a bust in the top 10, which is pretty rare. It's pretty rare when a draft class, there's 0 busts in the top 10. That does not happen every day. Everybody's a top 6 player. Everybody's either a top 6 forward or a top 3 defenseman. So while I wouldn't say everybody's a star, I would say everybody's a high-end starter. Yep. Yep. I had Lawson Krause went number 11. Outside of Connor McDavid, he was considered the best shooter in the draft. I mean, Lawson Krause never lived up to that hype as that top 6 winger, top 6 forward, but he's been a decent third, fourth line left winger on the Coyotes. He's currently the Coyotes' fourth line left winger. But yeah, he went 11th. Denis Gurianov went 12th to Dallas. I was about ready to give the Dallas Stars an F grade here, but you know, I gave them a C because Craig Button. The Bruins had 13, 14, and 15. But yeah, Denis Gurianov, Kate. I was not a fan of Denis Gurianov here. I think if the Dallas Stars had drafted one of the 2 players in my top 10 still on the board at 12, like Kyle Connor, who's the first line left winger on Winnipeg, or Barzal, who is a first line player in the Islanders, they may have won a cup by now. But This was a year where Dallas actually missed on their first round pick with Gurianov. Gurianov was a decent back six player, but Jim Nill did end up trading him to Montreal. The Bruins had 13, 14, and 15 and managed to miss on all three picks, which is insane. I mean, like, they drafted Jakub Zaboral at 13. They drafted Jake DeBrusk at 14 and Zach Senshishin at 15. And all three of those guys were busts, Joey. The most successful of those three was Jake DeBrusk, who did get a contract with the Canucks. And I'll quickly pull that up, the Jake DeBrusk contract, because he got a 7-year, $38.5 million deal, paying him $5.5 million per year. And he had 40 points in 80 games this year, 19 goals, 21 assists. That's not bad production, but I'd pay $4 million, 4.5 tops. I would not pay $5.5 million. Urinating Tree talked about some of the overpays in the NHL free agency. I would argue DeBrusk is one of them. I mean, solid player, but he's nothing spectacular. Yeah. Okay, so we'll get back to back end of round one here. Number 16 was Matthew Barzal, and I had Barzal at number 6 on my board in this draft. He's still on the Islanders a decade later. Kyle Connor, I had him in my top 10 too, and the Winnipeg Jets got him at 17. Both Barzal and Connor are still under contract with the teams that drafted them. So the NHL teams that made the Stanley Cup playoffs that listened to me, who took the two players in my top 10 at 16 and 17, were rewarded. Tomas Chabot, I believe he got traded this offseason. He was the Ottawa Senators 2015 first-round pick. No, Chabot is still on Ottawa 10 years later. I felt like he was better value than Jakub Zaboral, but at the same time, I felt like he was a 2-year project. But, Chabot's been good for an 18th overall pick. Joel Eriksson Ek got a 4-year extension. He's a 50 line. His weakness was leg strength, but he ended up getting a 5-year deal. Joel Eriksson Ek, he did get an extension. Ilya Samsonov got drafted by the Capitals here. Brock Bowser, I was not a fan of Brock Bowser. But he's one of the players that's still on the team that drafted him. Travis Konechny, still on the, I believe Travis Konechny's still on the Flyers too. The Flyers have drafted a lot of good centers. A lot of the centers they drafted, Scott Lafton, Sean Couturier, Konechny, all still on the teams that drafted him. Morgan Frost, we'll get to later. And yeah, another guy that's panned out. Flyers got a good first-round pick in Konechny. Noah Juleson was a third-line defenseman. Yeah. They got Lindros in the trade with the Quebec Nordiques, though. Lindros, if you're counting Lindros, he was drafted by the Nordiques and refused to play for them. So he got traded as a result. So, just saying. Yeah, it should. I'm going through the second round here as quickly as possible. The Carolina Hurricanes, I thought they reached for Aho because he's projected to go in the 40 to 50 range. But looking back on it, Aho played winger in Finland. He made the conversion to center, and now he's Carolina's number 1 center. Probably shouldn't have gave him a C grade, but at least I didn't give him an F grade, or I would have been roasted. I felt like Carlo would bust, but you got him at 37. I thought it was better value than Zaboral. And, Carlo did end up having a good career. He's still on the Bruins. So the Bruins did hit on their second round pick. Paul Bittner, Blue Jackets traded him. I think he was on the Vegas Golden Knights team as a bottom six forward. So Bittner's actually been a good pick. Mackenzie Blackwood was my favorite goalie in this draft. Eric Cernak, a defenseman. I don't know why I'll fix that here. But yeah, Eric Cernak was drafted by the Los Angeles Kings, but he would eventually be traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Cernak was a big part of the Lightning Stanley Cup run, but you can see why the NHL is number one. I'm trying to make this briefer, Joey. I'm trying to make this briefer so we can get to the 2016 drafts. But you could see why the NHL draft is number one for 2015. Cernak at 43 was a steal. Rupe Hintz. I had Rupe Hintz going in the third round, but he's now the Dallas Stars' first line center. Another Finland left winger makes the conversion to center in the NHL, and he's had success there. Jordan Greenway's been a solid third line winger, but he hasn't been anything spectacular in the NHL. Vince Dunn, he was decent early in his career before going to the Kraken in the expansion draft. Yeah, that's true. He's in a contract year. I don't think he comes back. They brought in Brandon Montour for a reason. I think if anybody gets traded before the season, it's probably him. It would be him or Adam Larson, their 2011, the New Jersey Devils 2011 first round pick. One of those two is going to get moved, or they'll keep one of them on the bench in case injuries occur. Yep. Yeah, the best value picks in round 3 are the two goalies. Daniel Vladar was drafted by the Bruins in the third round of the 2015 NHL draft. He was a decent backup in Boston for many years, but then he gets traded to Calgary. He now enters Calgary as the starting goalie in his contract year. And Aiden Hill, he was my other sleeper. I had my top 3 goalies in this draft were Mac or the Mackenzie Blackwood, Felix Sandstrom, and Aiden Hill. And Aiden Hill ends up going from Arizona to San Jose to Vegas, and he wins a Stanley Cup with Vegas. So Aiden Hill, probably the best value pick in the third round of this draft. There are some other players, but really, there were mock drafts that had Aiden Hill in the fourth round, but I loved his save percentage and I loved his tape. So I figured he's one of the guys that could end up being a steal in the draft, and he was. So I got that right at the time, which is insane. But Yeah, Carolina got Nicholas Roy in the 4th round. I mocked him between rounds 1 and 3. He fell to I mocked him to Carolina in the 2nd round. They didn't keep him though. They ended up trading him. I think he's on Vegas now, Nicholas Roy. I forgot how he got traded to Vegas. I think Vegas got him in the expansion draft from Carolina, but I'm double checking to find out how Vegas got him. Um, I'm guessing he went to Vegas in the expansion draft, but if I'm wrong, no, he was traded. So Rob was traded from the Hurricanes along with a 2021 fifth round pick to Vegas in exchange for Eric Holla. So that was a great trade by Vegas and GM Kelly McCrimmon. So that was a great trade by Vegas. I don't think Carolina should have traded him away, but they did because they wanted a defenseman that could help them win now. But they had a lot of center depth too in their defense. So you want to look at some of the blunders of Dom Waddell, the former Hurricanes GM that's now with Columbus. That is a rare Dom Waddell blunder. That's one of his rare blunders, but it is a blunder regardless. Yeah, Caleb Jones, the younger brother of Seth Jones, went in the 4th round. Caleb Jones and Ethan Bear were both considered top 100 players. Edmonton drafted both of them. They both had initial success, but they never really developed the way you'd hope they would. Edmonton would end up trading both players away. And then Kirill Kaprizov. The Wild got a first line left winger at 135, and Kaprizov. That's one pick that has panned out. That's probably the biggest steal of this draft. Kaprizov's been very good the last 2 years in Minnesota. Their leading point scorer. So Troy Terry, I believe he's the first line right winger on the Anaheim Ducks, Joey. He went to the Ducks at 148. So both Minnesota and Anaheim getting gems in this draft. And anything you want to add on those 5th round picks here? I'm hoping there are no more gems in rounds 6 and 7, but I'll try my best to find some gems. I did see a typo when we got to round 5, so I'm going to try my best to correct that. There was a 7th round goalie that made it to the NHL, so I feel like we've covered a good bulk of the draft picks. John Marino went to Edmonton in the 6th round. He was a 3rd to 4th round prospect. And remember, he went to the New Jersey Devils. And then New Jersey traded him to the Utah in this year's NHL draft. So, yeah. That's John Marino was John Marino's in the NHL. And he showed he could play on the first line. So, I mean, and the Columbus drafted Vladislav Gavrikov in the 6th round. The Kings gave Columbus a first-round pick to get Gavrikov. So Gavrikov from Russia was a steal. John Marino was a steal. There were some defensemen in round 6 that actually lived up to the hype in this draft. A couple defensemen. So I think the Flyers drafted a goalie in the 7th round that made the NHL. So I'm going to try to quickly get to that. And Ivan Fedotov, he's a 6'7" goalie. I gave the Flyers an F grade in round 7, but this is why Joey doesn't give seventh round picks F grades because you never know. And Fedotov was 6'7". We had zero info on this guy. I mean, none. He played goalie in Russia, but he made the NHL as a seventh round pick. He got promoted to the NHL this past year, and he made me look stupid. So I give him credit. Good job, Ivan Fedotov. Let's see if you can hold up a roster spot in the NHL, though. That's going to be the big challenge, as he's the backup goalie to Carter Hart. But yeah, Fedotov did make the NHL. All right, so that NHL just had talent everywhere. You can see why I had the NHL draft at number 1. Anything you want to add to that before I get to the 2016 draft class? All right, we're on to 2016. Coming in at number 5 is the 2016 MLB draft. YouTube said this was the worst. A YouTuber said this was the worst MLB draft since 1975. So that should say a lot. Mickey Moniak was drafted by the Phillies at 1. He's now on the Angels at center fielder. Nick Senzel. Ian Anderson. I was not a fan of Ian Anderson. I think he's still in the Braves rotation, though. Riley Pint hasn't panned out. Corey Ray, AJ Puck, Braxton Garrett, I believe, is in the Marlins starting rotation. Florence High School pitcher. Cal Quantrill, I was not a fan of Cal Quantrill initially, but he did have some decent years with the Guardians. Matt Manning, high school pitcher, had a few good years with the Tigers. Then he gets demoted to AAA. Kyle Lewis, Mercer, center fielder, never really played. William Benson went to the Cleveland Indians at 14. Alex Kirilloff of Plum High School in Pennsylvania. I gave the Twins a B grade for drafting Kirilloff. And to be fair to Kirilloff, the former Plum High School, I think Pat McAfee went to Plum as well, but the former Plum right fielder, he's still on the Minnesota Twins. That's one of the successful first-round picks in this draft. But Gavin Lux went to the Dodgers at 20. I gave the Dodgers an F grade for taking Gavin Lux when they had Corey Seager, but Gavin Lux has been a good player in the MLB. So really only 2 players, Kirilloff and Lux, are still on the team that drafted him. We interviewed TJ Zook leading up to this draft, but yeah, I mean, looking at the 2016 MLB draft, it was a very underwhelming draft class, and many YouTubers are saying it was the worst draft since 1975. I can't really argue with that, Joey. So it comes in at number 5. Dakota Hudson and Taylor Trammell went in the sandwich round. This was the only draft that I did all 5 rounds for. I've never done 5 rounds for any other draft since then because some of the picks don't sign, and that's really the issue. If all the picks signed contracts, I would do 20 rounds. But as you know, Joey, some of the draft picks don't sign. So that's really the big issue with the MLB draft, is some of the picks choose not to sign. I had a first-round grade on Brian. Go ahead. It is. Yep. And there were some good second-round picks in 2016. Even though 2016 was a horrible first round, there were some good second-round picks. Brian Reynolds, a player I mocked at 16, to the Angels, fell to the Giants at 59. The Giants would trade him to the Pittsburgh Pirates. The Pirates actually extended him. He's been an impact player. Him and Hayes have been the two catalysts for the Pirates. So Brian Reynolds is good. Brian Reynolds never should have fallen to 59, Joey. I had him to the Angels at 16. He fell all the way to 59. He never should have dropped that far. That was a guy who was very consistent in college. Okay? I mean, pretty complete prospect. His weak arm strength in the outfield is what caused him to drop to round 2. So he played center field in college, but he had a weak arm. That's why he fell to the second round. But he's been good. He's been a very dominant batter. Other good second round picks include Peter Alonso, the Mets first baseman out of Florida, and Bo Bichetti, the Toronto Blue Jays shortstop. So 3 teams did hit on second round picks. But yeah, there were a few second round picks that stood out. Brian Reynolds, Bo Bichetti, and Pete Alonso, the Mets home run derby winner. I think I had Alonso in round 1 too. I loved Alonso. I'm surprised they both fell to the second round. Because I think I had both of them going in the first round, which is nuts. Yeah. Third round of this draft, you had Sean Murphy, the Wright State catcher. I loved Sean Murphy. The Athletics took him in the third round. He's the top catcher in the fourth round. I thought it was a reach in terms of value, but he'd get traded to the Braves later on. The Braves would extend him. Great acquisition by the Braves. The Orioles took Austin Hayes, a right fielder on the Jacksonville Dolphins at 91. And with the very next pick, the Cleveland Indians took Aaron Savale out of Northeastern. I don't know, is Savale still in the Guardians, Joey? He was a great bullpen pitcher before becoming the Friday night starter in his junior year. Is Savale still on the Guardians? Do you know? No, he's on the Brewers, apparently. But he did play for the Indians, Guardians, and the Tampa Bay Rays. Yeah. I can't call Savale a bust, but at the same time, I think you can make an argument for him being one of the steals in the third round of this draft. Yeah, and the Dodgers got Dustin May out of Northwest High School at 101. He was able to become a top 3 starter in this rotation despite being a high school pitcher drafted in the 3rd round, but he couldn't stay healthy. He's had 2 consecutive season-ending injuries. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him. But that is a pick the Dodgers hit on in the 3rd round, Dustin May. The Brewers drafted Corbin Burnes at 111. That was a steal because Corbin Burnes was the number 1 starter on the Brewers, but they traded him to the Orioles before this season for prospects because they didn't think they could extend him. And, Corbin Burnes was the AL starting pitcher in the All-Star game this year. So Corbin Burnes and Shane Bieber, probably the headline players. I had Bobby Dahlbeck in the first. I think I had Dahlbeck going to Cleveland in the middle of the 3rd round, but he fell to the Red Sox. I don't think Dahlbeck has done much but Shane Bieber and Corbin Burnes are the 2 steals of round 4. Both Cleveland and Milwaukee got starting pitchers in the 4th round of this draft. That's the big takeaway here with the 2016 MLB draft. Yeah, it's pretty rare to hear Joey and I have a conversation, but both the Brewers and Guardians did it. Both of them got a number 1 ace in the 4th round. Brewers with Corbin Burnes and Cleveland with Shane Bieber. And the Orioles traded for Corbin Burnes before this year, but Corbin Burnes and Bieber both have season-ending injuries this year too. Well, no, Corbin Burnes didn't, but the Orioles had another pitcher. No, Corbin Burnes didn't have an injury. Bieber did, but Burnes started in the All-Star game, and Bieber probably would have started if he hadn't gotten injured. You can make the argument. Yeah, the only 5th round pick that stood out in the 2016 MLB draft was Cavan Biggio, Craig Biggio's son. He got drafted by the Blue Jays. He's now on the Dodgers as their starting second baseman. So that's the only 5th round pick from this draft to make the major league. But the lack of star power in round 1 is the big reason why this draft came in at number 5 for 2016. A lot of the 2016 drafts were underwhelming, but I think with all the talent we looked at outside of the 1st round, you can make an argument for this draft at number 4 or number 3. You really can. So even though I'm putting it at number 5, I think you can make an argument that it should be a spot or 2 higher. It's not in the number 1 conversation, but I think you can make a top 3 argument if you really take the value picks into account. What? You agree with me on that? Because a lot of the drafts in 2016 were underwhelming. Not just the MLB, MLS was underwhelming in 2016. NBA was underwhelming in 2016. The NHL had a drop off in talent among stars after the top 20. So 2016 was just a really underwhelming draft year for a lot of sports outside of the NFL, and the NFL capitalized on that. But you already know I'm got the NFL at 1. I didn't mean to spoil things, guys, but coming in at number 4 for 2016 is the NBA draft. Ben Simmons and Brandon Ingram went 1 and 2. And look, Simmons started out really well, has been very horrible the last 3 or 4 years. Like from 2016 to 2020, Ben Simmons was really good, and then from the COVID year until now, he sucked. Basically, that's Ben Simmons. Brandon Ingram was good with the Lakers, but the Lakers had to trade him to get Anthony Davis, and he's still been effective with the Pelicans. So I don't think Brandon Ingram's a bust, but he is a journeyman, and I think he's at the point where he's about to. Jaylen Brown went 3rd that year, the NBA Finals MVP, Jaylen Brown. He was a shooting guard at Cal. He made the transition to small forward. But yeah, Jaylen Brown was a great. It, yeah, only 2 NBA champions in the top 10. One of those was Jaylen Brown. The other was Jamal Murray, who actually showed he could transition from shooting guard to point guard. So Jamal Murray. Buddy Hield was in this draft. Buddy Hield went in the top 10 of this draft. Never won an NBA Finals, but he's been a good starter. So 4 good starters in the top 10. And really, the back end of round 1 was awful outside of one player, Pascal Siakam. Pascal Siakam, former New Mexico State power forward, went to Toronto at 27, and I gave the Raptors an A+ for Pascal Siakam. And to be fair to Toronto, Indiana did try to trade for Siakam, and the Pacers made the conference finals with Siakam after he won an NBA Finals. So he is the 3rd NBA champion in this first round. Siakam, Jaylen Brown, and Jamal Murray, the only 3 NBA champions in the first round of this draft. He led the WAC with 20.3 points per game and 11.6 rebounds, and that's why I thought he had star potential, and he was a great defender. So he was a great complementary player to Kawhi Leonard when the Raptors won it all. And then when Leonard left, he became the leader of that team for a few years until the Pacers traded for him this past year. I'm saying he'd be a top 5 pick in an NBA redraft. I'm not saying he would be a Hall of Fame player, but in an NBA redraft, he would be a top 5 pick for 2016. That's just how bad this class is. Yeah, and there was only one NBA draft where only one second round pick panned out. That was Malcolm Brogdon. He was drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks, but he became a starter with the Pacers, and then he became a starter with the Celtics. And then the Celtics moved him to Portland, and he's been around the block. He's still good enough to stay in the NBA, but he's a bench player at this point. NBA, you basically have a 2% probability of hitting on a second round pick. That's the equivalent of a seventh round pick in the NFL. The probability of hitting on a second round pick in the NBA is equivalent to hitting on a seventh round pick in the NFL. Yep. Yeah, and New York City FC, they were an expansion team in 2015, but they traded up for the number one pick. Yeah, I know I'm jumping into the 2016 MLS draft, but there was a lack of star power in the NBA draft. There were really only like 5 impact players in the entire class, including Brogdon. So that's why the NBA draft came in at number 4. Um, you know, Looking at MLS, number one pick in the 2016 MLS draft, Jack Harrison, 4 goals, 6 assists, 10 points as a rookie. And he had 10 goals, 3 assists his sophomore year. He had, all of his goals came on penalty kicks in year 2. He was money as far as penalty kicks go. Like, all of his MLS goals came on penalty kicks. But apparently, because Jack Harrison played at Wake Forest, but the Premier League was so impressed with him that they were like, because he was born in England. Jack Harrison was born in England, but he went from the MLS to Middlesbrough, a Premier League division semi-pro team, and then he went to Leeds United, and then he went to Everton. Everton is one of the best soccer teams in the world. And, he's had a lot of success, Jack Harrison. You can't call him a bust just because he left the MLS after 2 years. He had 8 goals and 8 assists on Leeds United back in 2020, 2021. He's had 3 goals, 3 assists in 25 starts on Everton this year. Yes, all 3 of those goals came on penalty kicks, but, you know, you know how hard it is to get to the English Premier League, which is considered the best soccer league in the world? He got there. He was drafted he was drafted in North America, but he was so good in North America that the English Premier League poached him away from America. So I can't call Jack Harrison a bust despite only spending 2 years in the MLS, Joey, because the English Premier League poached him away from America. And if you're only 2 years into your professional MLS career and the English Premier League poaches you away, that says something. And he won back-to-back championships with Leeds United in the English Premier League too. He won back, so he's a 2-time English Premier League champion. So yes, so Jack Harrison's not a bust. The fact that he was the Gatorade High School Player of the Year in 2015, and he was so good as a freshman with 8 goals, 11 assists as a true freshman that he went straight from Wake Forest to the MLS as a freshman. And New York City FC, they traded allocation money to get him, only to watch him get poached by the Premier League. Joshua Yarrow was considered the best player in that draft, and he fell to number 2. And Yarrow had an underwhelming start to his career, but he gets demoted to the USL after his time in he was in Yarrow was on the Union for 3 years, and then he ends up going to then he ends up going to the USL, where he played for where he'd end up playing for San Antonio FC and San Diego Loyal, and then St. Louis City SC picked him up, and he's rebounded on there. Like, he got his first career MLS goal 8 years after being drafted with St. Louis. So I'm kind of happy for him, because he's a guy who he gets demoted from the MLS to USL, and he gets a second chance, and he actually takes advantage of it. So I am happy for Yarrow in that respect. And he's done a good job when being called upon by St. Louis. I mean, he was a guy that was considered the consensus #1 player in this draft. So for him to get demoted and then to come back and reclaim a starting job, that says something. So Keegan Rosenberry went 3rd. Brandon Vincent went 4th. You Yarrow wasn't as good as Harrison. I'm not arguing that. I'm saying it's a cool story to see a guy go from the MLS, get demoted, and then come back to the MLS and have success. It's good to see. But yeah, outside of those 2 picks, this was sort of an underwhelming draft. Yeah. Yep. I had to go all the way to the third round to find another player I liked outside of the top two picks. Brennan Hines Ike out of South Florida, drafted 55th overall. He's now a starting center back on Austin FC. That's the outside of the top two picks. That's the only player still in the MLS among this draft class. So you can argue that I ranked the MLS list a little bit too high. I think that argument does have some merit here. Um, Justin Bilyeu, a player I interviewed, ended up going in the first round. Only one, and it was the number one pick. So the number one, number two, and number 55 picks in a 4-round MLS draft were the only three that were successful in that draft. So you can argue that I ranked the MLS too high by putting it at 3 when you had all that talent in the MLB draft, when you had the NBA draft. Joey's probably going to put the MLS draft at 5 on his rankings, but he can understand the thought process of. But it's like I said, a lot of the 2016 drafts were underwhelming. Toronto, NHL came in at 2, but I don't think there's anything that can touch the NFL. Austin Matthews panned out. He's probably been the most. 2017 is going to be exciting. The fact that I'm making Joey wait that long to get into the 2017 conversation, it's kind of a dick move, but I'm going to get through 2016 as quickly as possible. Austin Matthews, number one pick, probably the most successful number one pick of the 5 number one picks. Ben Simmons, Jack Harrison, Jared Goff. Look, Austin Matthews is a top 3 player in the league. You can't say that about Jared Goff. He's a top 10 quarterback, but he's not a top 3 player in the league. I mean, Austin Matthews is considered the best player outside of McDavid and McKinnon at center. So he is a top 3 player in the league now. So, but he just hasn't gotten the conference finals yet. Patrick Laine went second, traded from Winnipeg to Columbus. He's good, but he's been underwhelming for a second overall pick. Pierre-Luc Dubois was drafted 3rd by Columbus. He is now on his 3rd or 4th different NHL team. Jesse Puljujarvi went 4th. He was the consensus number 2 player at the times, but there were a few questions with Puljujarvi. He didn't put enough shooting power on the puck, made 2 separate Twitter accounts, and there was knee surgery on his left knee. But that's probably why he fell from 2 to 4, and he was a bust with the Oilers. He is on the Pittsburgh Penguins as a 4th-line right winger, though, in a contract year. Oliu Olevi got drafted by Vancouver at 5, and he ended up being a massive bust. Oliu Olevi wasn't even the best player on the London Knights. I had Matthew Tkachuk as my number. Matthew Tkachuk went 6 to Calgary. He gets traded to Florida, and he wins a Stanley Cup. Matthew Tkachuk is a guy that I said he has more potential than Puljujarvi, and I did not think he would fall to 6 in real life, but he did. Matthew Tkachuk's been one of the steals of this draft. Clayton Keller is a first-line player on the Arizona Coyotes. He's still with the team that drafted him as he enters the Utah Hockey Club. So those 3 players in the top 7, Austin Matthews, Matthew Tkachuk, and Clayton Keller, those are the 3 best players in this draft. And then the rest of this draft has been pretty underwhelming. Mikhail Sergachev went 9th to Montreal. He gets traded to Tampa Bay for Jonathan Drouin, who was drafted by the Lightning, teammates with Nate McKinnon on Halifax. And Sergachev wins a cup with Tampa. Tyson Yost gets traded from Colorado to Minnesota. Logan Brown goes to Ottawa. Michael McLeod spent most of his career in New Jersey, but he gets traded. Jake Bean. Charlie McAvoy was drafted by the Bruins at 14, and he's the number one defenseman on the Bruins. So looking at the top half of this draft, 4 picks stood out. 4 guys ended up becoming star players. Austin Matthews, Matthew Tkachuk, Clayton Keller, and McAvoy, and that's really it. That is really it when you look at the big picture in the top 15. Those were the only star players. Jacob Chichern, I had him in my top 15. He fell to the Coyotes at 16. He's been a first-line defenseman. He's been really good. Matthews and Tkachuk would have been 1 and 2 in a redraft, Joey. I mean, if we did a redraft right now, Austin Matthews is still going to Toronto, even though you don't really care much for him because he played in Switzerland and then he came to North America to play, and then because he grew up in Arizona, but he left Arizona to go to Switzerland, and then he goes from Switzerland to Canada, and he's still in Canada. Outside of McDavid, he's the most popular player in Canada. But Chichern and Fabro both became first-line defensemen on Arizona and Nashville, the teams that drafted them. And then Chichern gets traded to Ottawa, and now he's on the Capitals. So Chichern and Fabro both panned out. Logan Stanley kind of disappointed me. I thought he was going to be a good player. Kiefer Bellows didn't pan out. Gauthier was a player, 6'4", 225. We had high hopes for him. He sort of let us down. Riley Tuft went to Dallas. He did not pan out. Tage Thompson, he was a right winger in college. He ends up becoming the Buffalo Sabres first-line center. He's never broken 100 points. I like Thompson, but I don't consider him a big-time star. But outside of Austin Matthews and Tkachuk, you can argue there's not really a superstar in this draft because those are the 2 big ones that stand out, because Austin Matthews is considered a better player by most than Tkachuk, but outside of Matthews and Tkachuk, there really wasn't a big-time star player. And I'm going through round 2 now. Jordan Kyrou went to the Blues at 35. He ended up becoming a first-line right winger. He's not a star player, but part of a Stanley Cup team. That was probably the best value pick in round 2. Alex DeBrincat was a player that I had a first-round grade on. He was 5'7", 161, but he had 100 points. He played really well next to McDavid and Strome on the top line, and DeBrincat has had success despite his height in the NHL. So he's been a good top 6 forward. But DeBrincat and Kyrou were really the 2 guys in round 2 that were steals. And Carter Hart, another guy. Carter Hart, my top goalie. He was another steal. So there were 3 good value picks in the second round. And then everybody else sort of disappointed. Carl Grundstrom was a player I liked. I feel like he was on Vegas or Florida. I don't remember where he ended up. Taylor Radish was drafted by the Lightning. I don't remember him. I mean, he hasn't been bad, but he hasn't been spectacular either. Toronto got Joseph Woll in the 3rd round. They got their starting goalie, and they got Austin Matthews. So they got 2 big pieces, but outside of that, they really didn't do much. Adam Fox fell to the 3rd round. Norris Trophy defenseman. He didn't want to go to Calgary. He didn't want to go to Carolina. He wouldn't sign with either team. He ends up going to the Rangers and signing with them and becoming a Norris Trophy winning defenseman. So that was really the only good value pick in round 3. But his situation was kind of unique. He didn't want to go to any other teams, but he ends up going to the team he wants to, and he ends up becoming a success. So, but yeah, I probably should. I'm just skimming through this. We probably should get to the 2016 NFL draft soon, It's just this like, I'm just trying to see if there's any more gems, but I'm just scrolling through at this point. Nope, round 5. And this is why the NFL wins for 2016, because a lot of players, there were good players, there were a few good players in rounds 2 or 3, but a lot of underwhelming players that never really became what you were hoping they would become. And that's the big problem with the 2016 NHL draft, the 2016 NBA draft, the 2016 MLS draft, and the 2016 MLB draft. All of these drafts underachieved in 2016. And that's really the big issue, is a lot of these drafts underachieved in that respect. So I think Jesper Bratt was drafted by the New Jersey Devils in round 6. That was a steal because Jesper Bratt is the Devils' first-line right winger. So Jesper Bratt in round 6 was a steal. Outside of that, outside of Joseph Woll at the top of the 3rd round and Jesper Bratt in round 6, there really wasn't any draft day steals. The lack of steals makes this one of the weaker classes. Travis Barron, I liked Barron. I think he made the NHL, but he never became the player I thought he would become. But yeah, this was a very underwhelming draft, 2016. All right, we're on to the 2016 NFL draft. And, you know, the only 3 quarterbacks we liked, finally we're on the new code, Joey. The new code, well, the current code of the site, but yeah, most of the 2015 and 2016 drafts had older code. This one was like the first draft where, and this was the Jared Goff, Carson Wentz draft, okay? Goff, still a good quarterback. Goff was my QB1. Dak was Joey's QB1. We both hit on our QBs. I kind of had a feeling Carson Wentz was going to go second. Carson Wentz had early success. Looked like he was on pace to win MVP his second year before the season-ending injury. Was never the same after that. Now Carson Wentz is the backup to Patrick Mahomes. So if Patrick Mahomes gets injured, Carson Wentz will be starting. So, but the Eagles traded. This was the year you met Oren. This was the year you met Oren, Joey. 2016 was the year you met Oren. Yeah. Yeah, and people forget Goff was the president of the Delta Omega fraternity at California for 2 seasons, so he was a fraternity president. Leonard was in a fraternity, but he was not a fraternity president. Goff was a president of a fraternity, Delta Omega at Cal, so I'm not critiquing him for that. I think that's kind of impressive. Anytime you can work your way up to president of an organization, even if it's a fraternity, that's impressive. That says something about your leadership, Joey. I had Goff at 17 in my very first mock draft back in June. And I said, keep an eye on this guy, because if Hackenberg, Connor Cook, and Cardale Jones slip up, Goff could be the number 1 pick. And everybody thought I was crazy in the summer of 2015, but that's what ended up happening. Yeah. And he got extended with the Lions too. He got extended with the Lions this past off season too. He led the Rams to Super Bowl 53. He got the Lions to the NFC title, and I think he's going to get the Lions to Super Bowl 59 this year. We both agree on that. Yeah. But this draft, we hyped it up like it was going to be a good quarterback draft. But I was wrong about him being the best quarterback. Your guy, Dak Prescott, ended up being the best quarterback. But both our quarterbacks were 1 and 2. And that's what's funny is there were three, like when this draft process started, there were as many as 5 quarterbacks getting first round consideration. And that includes Hackenberg, Cook, and Cardale Jones. But Goff and Carson Wentz were the two that emerged. And Paxton Lynch also emerged from this draft. We'll get to Paxton in a little bit. But, yeah. Yep. Yes. Yeah, Carson Wentz, he was a Senior Bowl MVP. He did start out good initially, but at the same token, he never reached his ceiling due to his injury in his second year. And he did have the best Senior Bowl week since Phillip Rivers. That's a big reason why he propelled up to number 2, because this was a draft that didn't have a clear-cut QB2. Dak had some off-the-field stuff heading into this draft. Well, this is also one of Howie Roseman's whiffs, because it's a rare whiff, but it is a whiff by Howie Roseman. So, he's the Chiefs' backup quarterback. If Patrick Mahomes gets injured, There's not going to be Chad Henne to bail him out. It's going to be Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz is going to have to bail Andy Reid out in that situation. Or the Ravens. You're not giving the Ravens enough respect. And maybe that's the bias in you as an Ohio sports fan, but I love Voorhees. I love the additions they've made. They've got Ronnie Stanley, who's very good when healthy, who was able to neutralize Myles Garrett until the injury. I mean, they got Linderbaum. Until they I think this is their last year where they can convince me. And if they fail to get there this year, they're going to have to prove it. They got Rosengarten in the second round at right tackle. So he's the projected starter at right tackle, Rosengarten. But Falele and Rosengarten are going to compete for the right tackle job. And whoever wins that is going to be the bookend to Ronnie Stanley. And Ben Cleveland. I liked Ben Cleveland. I think Cleveland has enough potential to be a borderline starter or an above average starter, but he's not a high end starter. And Cleveland. And it's all about the Ravens because Vegas agrees with me. Vegas has the Chiefs and Ravens as the two favorites to win the AFC. They don't even have the Browns in the top 7. The Vegas has the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bills, the Texans. I think the Texans and Bills are 3 and 4. And then they have the Bengals at 5, the Dolphins at 6, and the Jets at 7. And they have the Browns at 8. They are in second behind the Chiefs. They are second. No, they're second. The Texans and Bills are tied for third. No, the Ravens are second. The Ravens and Chiefs are 1 and 2. And they added Eddie Jackson. So they have Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton as the starting safeties. And they also added Eddie Jackson from the Bears, but they can play Kyle Hamilton at nickel. Our Lads has Eddie Jackson listed as a starting safety. I disagree. I think Kyle Hamilton will start at free safety and Eddie Jackson will be in a backup role. Because remember, they had that safety from Iowa. Very good backups. Ravens had a really good backup safety last year. I think Eddie Jackson's replacing that guy. I don't think he's starting, but we're getting off topic, so we're going to get back to the draft here. The Eagles got Carson Wentz. Number 3 pick was Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa ends up becoming a 34 right outside linebacker on the Chargers, and he's been pretty good. Most had him as the number 1 player in this draft. Ezekiel Elliott went 4th. Elliott got off to a good start, but he couldn't maintain his high level of play. Ends up going to the Patriots for a year, and he comes back to Dallas this year, and he's the starting running back on Dallas. So, I mean, it feels like Elliott never left, even though he did. Jalen Ramsey's always been a good corner, but he's been a me guy. Not necessarily a team guy, he's a me guy. He's got to be taken care of first. He'll deliver, but he's got to be taken care of first. And you're only going to get 2 to 5 good years out of him before he has to go decline and go to another team before he becomes a cap casualty. Because that's what happened with the Jaguars. They got 2 really good years out of him, and then he wanted out after the AFC Championship. He wanted out. Yeah. Because he was great with the Rams initially. Then he sucked in the Super Bowl, still got his ring, and then he became a cap casualty for the Rams. So they moved him to Miami. And because Miami traded for Ramsey, they couldn't bring back Xavier Howard. And I believe Xavier Howard and Justin Simmons, neither one's been signed yet. It's corner. He's a corner, but yeah. He's a corner, but yeah. He was a corner, though. He's mainly a corner. He's always been a corner. He's never played safety. Yeah. And I had Ramsey grade higher than Eric Berry, Patrick Peterson, and Joe Hayden. Now, as far as talent goes, yes, he's talented. Has he lived up to the hype? He's a good player. I don't think he's as good as I graded him. I gave him a 98 out of 99. I gave Ramsey Stingley and Sauce Gardner, and while Ramsey's been good, he hasn't been that good yet. He was supposed to be Florida State's best corner since Deion Sanders. He was. He was supposed to be Florida State's best corner since Deion, and he's been a Pro Bowl corner, but he's also been somewhat of a disappointment compared to what he was hyped up to be. We'll get the Denzel Ward when we get to 2018. Can we not go on a Browns tangent? Don't give the Ravens the middle finger. In the league, once he blossomed, and he never became that. I'm not trying to interrupt. I guess I did, but I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to get through each draft class as quickly as possible because I want to get to yeah. Go ahead. He's not a bust, but he is an underachiever. For as good as he was hyped up to be, he has underachieved. Still a Pro Bowl corner, but he's also underachieved. It's kind of unique. The Ravens got Ronnie Stanley at 6. I had Stanley and Tunsil both graded at 93 out of 99. Stanley had better character, plus Tunsil's stepfather sued him before the draft. But this was before the video. I didn't mention, so there were a few things that caused Ronnie Stanley to go ahead of Tunsil. One, his stepfather sued him before the draft, and number two, there's a video of him getting high, which caused him to drop, because there were mocks that had Tunsil and the Titans at 1 before. There were mocks that had him at 1 before the Titans traded the pick to the Rams. They were 1A and 1B for me, essentially. Yeah. Buckner ended up going a pick later, and Buckner ended up going a pick later. He ended up being a really good defensive tackle with the 49ers. He's also a really good defensive tackle with the Colts. He got the Niners to Super Bowl 54. Jack Conklin, I thought he would beat out I thought Conklin would beat out Taylor Lewan for the left tackle job. And when Lewan got injured, they never moved Conklin over to left tackle. They just kept him at right tackle in Tennessee. The Browns gambled on Conklin. It backfired. look, Conklin was very promising right out of the gate, but he's also one of these guys that peaked after 2 or 3 years. That's the thing. I'm not going to say he's a bust, but he peaked very early. He's a good floor player, and he peaked very early. Yeah. Yeah. The only other player in the top 10 was Leonard Floyd, and Leonard Floyd is legitimately the first bust of this draft. I'm not going to call Carson Wentz a bust, even though you can argue he is a bust. Leonard Floyd, I feel like should not have gone this high. I had Miles Jack. I mean, I don't know. I was not high on Miles Jack coming out of UCLA, but Jack surprised me. Eli Apple, I gave the Giants an F grade for Eli Apple. He had his moments in Super Bowl 56, I guess, but Eli Apple for me was nothing spectacular, and he was a liability for the Bengals. What's crazy is he stopped Amari Cooper when Alabama lost to Ohio State in the college football playoff. Eli Apple's best game was against Amari Cooper in college, but, he's never really had that breakout game in the NFL outside of the interception in the Super Bowl. Yeah. Leonard Floyd was not very good. Vernon Hargraves was another reach at 11. I'm trying to get through this as quickly as possible. Yeah. Dolphins got Laramie Tunsil at 13 and traded him to the Texans. So Tunsil was a steal for as far as he fell. Yeah. But outside of the tackles, everyone else underachieved in 2016 because there were 4 tackles taken in the top 16. Laramie Tunsil, Ronnie Stanley, Jack Conklin, Taylor Decker. Decker's still the Lions' left tackle 8 years later. So 3 of those guys are effective left tackles, and Conklin's the odd man out. To be fair, I gave the Lions a C+ for drafting Taylor Decker. I did not like the pick initially. I felt like Elliott was the guy who the Lions are considering extending Taylor Decker. They're not going to buy him out. They're going to extend him. They already extended Sewell, but they're thinking about extending Taylor Decker again. They're already talking about it. According to Detroit Live, Taylor Decker is under contract till 2026, but the Lions are already he's under contract till 2025, but the Lions are already having conversations about extending Decker, who's a UFA next year. And he's Taylor Decker is 9th on Pro Football Focus. So that's why the extension's warranted. So the Lions are having conversations about extending him, but the tackles and Goff, some of the other picks we didn't mention, Carl Joseph, we liked him initially, but yeah, I mean, we liked him initially, thought he had potential as a starter. He never put everything together. I still think he can be a solid backup or third string safety, but he's a camp guy at this point in his career if he still wants to play. Corey Coleman, I gave the Browns a B grade for Corey Coleman. I mean, if I go on a Corey Coleman rant, Joey's gonna grab a wet fish out of the ocean, bring the wet fish on the live stream, and slap the shit out of me with the wet fish until I change the subject. He had 20 receiving touchdowns and better character than Josh Gordon, but everybody missed on Coleman. That's the thing. Keanu Neal is competing for a starting safety job across from Minkah Fitzpatrick. I think he did last year. Keanu Neal's sort of a journeyman at this point. Ryan Kelly's been a good center for the Colts. He's been a steady center. He's in a contract year. Ryan Kelly's been good. Injuries have kept him out at times, but Ryan Kelly's been a good first round pick. Shaq Lawson and Deron Lee went 19 and 20. Will Fuller, Josh Dotson, Laquan Treadwell, William Jackson III, Artie Burns, Paxton Lynch. Just this back end of the first round was very meh. Kenny Clark out of UCLA, the Packers' first round pick, and Kenny Clark and Ryan Kelly are the two players that weren't meh. Robert Nkevish, Vernon Butler, Jermaine Ifedi. This was a very meh back end of the first round. I'm sorry, Joey. I'm just calling it as I see it. 2016 NFL draft was somewhat underwhelming. Still better than the NHL draft, but 2016 was a down year for drafts. Ogba was a player that went to the Browns at 32. He's been effective, but at this point, he's a number 3 edge rusher in his career. He might be a good number 2 edge. To be fair to the 2016 NFL draft, there were a lot of second round picks that outplayed the first round picks. Hunter Henry, Miles Jack, Jalen Smith. There were a lot of second round picks that initially outplayed the first round picks. Chris Jones, probably the most notable name. Yeah, I gave the Chiefs a C+ for Chris Jones, but Chris Jones would be a top 10 pick in a redraft today. Xavier Howard. So there were a lot of second round picks that outplayed their first round counterparts. That's a big reason why the NFL came in at number 1 for 2016. Derrick Henry went 45th. Michael Thomas was great before his injury. Jerron Reed. Tyler Boyd went to the Bengals in round 2 of this draft. I thought Aguayo was in the 2016 draft. But yeah, Aguayo was, I thought Aguayo was in 2015. He was in 2016, actually. Von Bell, very good journeyman safety. Bradbury, a lot of the second round picks outperformed their first round counterparts. That's all I'm going to say on the 2016 draft round 2. Kevin, what the? I gave the I had an undrafted grade on Kevin Byard. I gave the Titans an F grade for Byard, but Byard was probably arguably their best pick outside of Derrick Henry. Kevin Byard was probably the Titans' best pick in this draft. Because remember, they got Conklin, Derrick Henry, and Byard with their first 3 picks. That was great drafting by the Titans. That was probably John Robinson's best draft. I mean, John Robinson wore out his welcome in Tennessee, but 2016 was probably his best draft. That draft with Conklin, Derrick Henry, and Byard, that draft gave him the job security he needed. I mean, that draft gave him the job security to overstay his welcome. And then he traded A.J. Brown and got fired after that. But, yeah, I should probably have waited to say that. But, yeah, Yannick was my favorite player in the third round of this draft. Really the only A-plus grade for me. We'll get to him. We'll get to Dak. And I really don't think we need to go in depth. Joe Thuney went to the Patriots at 78. That was a good pick. He's a top 5 guard in the league now. Kendall Fuller's still considered number 1 corner on the Commanders. Jacoby Brissett, I gave the Patriots a D grade for Brissett. He was but he had he had better character than Connor Cook, Cardale Jones, and Dak Prescott. The character's probably why. The Browns took Cody Kessler 2 picks after I had Kessler ahead of I had Brissett at 15 of 15 on my rankings. Justin Simmons was a player I loved. Broncos took him at 98. Simmons was probably, and Yannick were probably the 2 biggest steals. Yeah. All right. Round 4, Tyler Higbee at 110, probably best pick in round 4. I mean, the Rams hitting on Higbee was big for them. Hitting on Higbee in round 4 was big for the Rams. And Higbee, he's not the player he used to be, but he's still with the team that drafted him. So him and Dak Prescott are probably the 2 best value picks in the 4th round. Anya Meta went in round 4. I gave the Saints a D grade for taking Anya Meta, but Anya Meta's been Anya Meta's been a reliable starter. Blake Martinez, I had a first round grade on him. I had a first or second on Blake Martinez. He fell to the Packers at 131. Really good right out of the gate, but then he peaked. Now Blake Martinez sells Pokemon cards. I think he got arrested for selling fake Pokemon cards. But yeah, Blake Martinez went from being one of the most respected linebackers in Stanford history to selling Pokemon cards. What a career arc for Blake Martinez. Just want to throw that out there. And Dak Prescott was one of the very last picks in round 4. Dean Lowry went 137. I did not like Dean Lowry initially. I gave this pick a Brett Favre toga party grade, but Dean Lowry would that was an Animal House joke, but yeah, Dean Lowry ended up being really good and surprising us. And Dak Prescott went to Dallas. So, and then the Bills got Cardale Jones to end the 4th round. So, yeah. Yeah, the Bills took Cardale Jones in the 4th round. But yeah, that's the 4th round. There were a lot of notable picks. A few, actually. I gave it an A+ as well. Because I had Dak, and Dak was my QB3, but I knew he wasn't going to get picked in the 1st round. I had Dak as my QB3 behind Wentz and Goff. So, yeah. So, good job, Joey. You got the QB1 right. It's just Dean Lowry, Tyler Higbee, Blake Martinez. There were some good 4th round picks in this draft. I feel like we've mentioned all the notable names. I'm going to try to quickly get through rounds 5 through 7 because I know there were some gems. Um, Matt Judon went to the Ravens at 146, and he's now the Patriots' #1 edge rusher. Explosive burst, 23 and a half tackles for a loss and 20 sacks at Grand Valley State. Matt Judon was one of the gems of this draft. Probably the best value pick in round 5 of this draft. Matt Judon. That was a great value pick. Tyreek Hill. I gave the Chiefs a C grade for Tyreek Hill because he was listed as a running back. But Tyreek Hill has been a massive steal. DJ Reader. The Texans drafted DJ Reader. He went to the Bengals. He's now on the Lions. So looking at the 5th round, there were some good players in round 5. There's a few, actually. A few stars. Hill probably the biggest, but yeah. Yeah, but if you had drafted Allen over Mayfield, I think you beat I think you beat the Chiefs if you draft Josh Allen over Baker Mayfield. Because Allen, yeah, he took a while to blossom, but he peaked in that 2020-2021 season. So I think if you had picked him over Baker, I think you beat the Chiefs and you're in the Super Bowl. But we'll never know. Yeah, but Tyreek Hill, Matt Judon are the 2 stars, and DJ Reader, while he's a high-end starter, he's not a star. Judon and Hill are the 2 stars of this, and Judon sort of gets overshadowed by Hill because Hill's just been that freaking good. It's not that Judon sucks, it's that Hill's been that freaking good, and fantasy football fans, they want to talk about skill positions, not edge rushers, even though edge rushers are more valuable. Most of the Twitter universe and community when they want to talk about fantasy players and skill positions. So for that reason, Judon gets overshadowed by Hill. They're both stars. Nearly had 2,000 yards. What are you saying 200 yards? He nearly had 2,000 yards. I think that's what you're trying to say, but it's like, yeah. Derek Watt, the second Watt brother behind JJ, the middle child. Derek in the middle, Malcolm in the middle reference, but Derek in the middle. You had JJ Watt, you had Derek, and then you had TJ Watt. So Derek Watt went in round 6. Fullback, probably the best value pick here. I could go through the names in this list. It's not great. It's not a great list for round 6, but Derek Watt was probably the best player in round 6. Annie Janovich, fullback, Nebraska. Hemingway, DJ White, Drew Kaiser, Bowinger, Tyron Holmes, Keenan Reynolds, Bond, Jarrell Adams, DeAndre Houston, Carson, Jakeem Grant. Jakeem Grant was a good special teams player. To be fair to Jakeem Grant, drafted by the Dolphins. But initially, he was a good special teams player. But yeah, I mean, Watt and yeah, so those are the 2 standouts so far. Dan Vitale, Blake Countance, Wes Schweitzer. But yeah, Josh Forrest, Jake Rudock, Anthony Brown at Purdue. I liked Anthony Brown initially, but he peaked eventually. Yep. Cody